Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with more sports news. And of course, over the weekend, this past Saturday, KU Jayhawks took on the BYU Cougars, which was supposed to be heralded as an exciting game and a pretty much of a matchup of the number one pick and the number two pick, and AJ DeBansta, and of course, Peterson, of course. So Darren Peterson and AJ Debanska, of course, the game was exciting, but both I felt like had underwhelming performances, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But overall, it was a very exciting game, a game that BYU trailed in most of the game, but they made a way to make it more interesting towards the end until ultimately, they just mounted a comeback way too late, and eventually they met their fate of losing that game. Of course, it was at the Fog in Lawrence, but I felt like there are a lot of takeaways from this game, a lot of takeaways that people didn't consider in the X factors, especially when you consider a guy like Richie Saunders for BYU, who was a phenomenal shooting game over the weekend, and definitely rose his stock for the NBA and for perspective draft stock. He's a senior as well, so I think this pretty much will be his last year. So he made a great performance on a major stage and will really set the table for his draft stock because you can always use a 3-point shooter and definitely a scorer, and he appeared to be that. It was layups, dunks, 3-point shots. He was looking a lot like Austin Reeves from LA Lakers. Like he didn't look athletic or he didn't look the most exciting, but then he was able to make all these plays at times when they definitely needed him. Because at one point they were down 20 plus points. Richie Saunders threes and a couple of defensive moves from the defensive team, from the defensive squad, were able to make plays and get them back in this game. But Richie Saunders was obviously the best player on BYU that night, which most people probably expected AJ DeBansta to be that. But Richie Saunders ended up being that shooting. He had 33 points, 10 rebounds, and he shot 6 of 14 from the three-pointer, which he was almost 50% from three. And just took a lot of shots at the end that they needed to shoot. Otherwise, I felt his three-point percentage would have been a lot better, but he had to take a lot of shots that they, late in the shot clock and things like that were highly contested. But for the most part, he played an exceptional game on that Saturday night. Another X factor in the game was Melvin Council Jr., a very athletic guard. I think he'll be a great guard in the league, and I think he rose his draft stock a little bit as well, because KU is a big program. They don't play a lot of primetime games as much, especially not when you're playing somebody like BYU. So he got a lot of different looks last night, and he kind of reminded me of a Westbrook, not in the terms of like rebounding or being able to pass, but more of his athleticism and his build, his ability to drive to the paint fearlessly amongst the giants and things like that. Because there were a lot of tall and big defenders he had to go through of BYU, but his athleticism and his skill set kind of remind me a lot of Westbrook. Of course, he's a better shooter, and he's not the passer or rebound that Westbrook is. But when you think about his build and his athleticism and his ability to drive the paint, he was definitely in that realm of Westbrook, closest NBA comp I could find. But yeah, I think he'll be a force in the league as well. Especially if he gets with the right team. But the stars of the show, like I talked about before, underperform. I felt, especially AJ DeBansta. But it's an argument about who had the most underperformance because they both played two different halves. So Darren Peterson was on fire in the first half with 18 points. Then, of course, he didn't play the second half. So there's nothing to rate him for the second half. If it was in school, you would give him an I as incomplete for the second half because he didn't play it. And, a lot of halves and a lot of games he hasn't been playing this year, which should be concern for a lot of these NBA teams because, you have someone who has a phenomenal skill set in Darren Peterson, right? But like they say, the best ability is availability, and he constantly has these injuries with leg injuries, and there is some discussion if he's really injured or not. Um, who knows? But still, at the end of the day, you have to try to give it a go. You have to do something, especially in a big game like that. I know the ultimate goal is the NBA and to make the money, but if you're sitting out just to preserve yourself for the money, these teams will dock you for that. Uh, like I said, it's not like the NFL where you're a quarterback and they really need you and stuff like that. These teams can find another way around. This is a very deep draft with Cameron Boozer and AJ DeBansta and all of these other pieces that they have. So it's not like he's irreplaceable. So a lot of those things, if you really have these injuries, you need to try to figure them out because when you get to the league, a lot of people probably won't draft you because of just the sheer effect of is this guy going to be available? It's the Kawhi Leonard situation all over again, or in some respects, Victor Wembanyama. These players are great, but we don't never, their own play restriction. We never know if they're available. You rather have a person that is mediocre but plays all the time and is stable than the phenomenal player that play misses, 20 to 30 games a year because it's just not good for team camaraderie. It's not good for team chemistry. And I think a lot of part of why KU has all those losses this year is because of the inconsistency from his availability. So I think that was a big part of last night, a takeaway from Darren Peterson because he didn't play a whole second half. In the first half, he was on fire, felt like he couldn't miss. And it does and a lot of people are questioning his motor if he really loves the game or it's just about the money or about the fame or whatever it is. That's yet to see. Of course, I'm pretty sure he'll be still drafted in the first top two picks. So it's yet to see what his future will look like. Will he still be injured in the league or will he figure some things out? And then AJ, Tabansa, definitely underperformed this weekend for the simple fact of he just didn't bring his game. He didn't take a shot until late in the first half, and then he was off for most of those. He finished the game decently, I believe, with 15 points, but you know, I most people probably projected him to get 30 because the last 4 games or so, he's averaging like 33 points a game. His teammate Richie Saunders got that, but he didn't, even get halfway to that scoring. So it was very underwhelming to see. And then the most impressive thing or unimpressive thing was throughout the whole night, he had 1 rebound. And I remember that rebound. I want to say it was in early in the second quarter and late in the first. I mean, the first half. So it was very disappointing, especially for production wise, for Debanza, especially for him to being a tall guy. He did make some big threes, and he made a drive to the basket that was pretty impressive against Badunga. But other than that, he really didn't have a memorable night. He wasn't really good on defense either. Um, Darren Peterson shot a floater right over him, and it was pretty impressive. So he looked like the stage was a little too big for him, and that's a pause for concern probably for these NBA draft perspectives. Just seeing how you perform in these big games, because if you play like this in the March Madness tournament, you're going to be out pretty fast. So they're going to have to figure out, or he's going to have to figure out how to be more aggressive early. Because in the second half, he started to be more aggressive, but it was in spots. As the leader of that team or the best person on that player on that team, he should demand the basketball. He should be able to get to his spots. He should be able to take command. It's one thing if you're missing shots, but just not taking them is a whole nother thing. So he has to be able to at least get up like 20 shots in a game like that. You have to go out swinging. I feel like he only picked his spots, especially in the second half. But the first half, he was very passive and appeared to be very timid. Not to say he was scared of the moment, but it feels like he was kind of hesitant, like those boxers that wait for the right punch. And the trainers tell him there's not going to be the perfect punch. You just got to go out. You just got to, try out some stuff. You got to start swinging. And I felt like AJ just wasn't able to do that. But as a star of the team or the best player on the team, he should definitely be more aggressive in games like that, especially when it comes to March Madness tournament. You don't want to get out in the first, round or two, just because you didn't take enough shots and then you let your team down. So as I said before, it's a very exciting game. This KU BYU game was very exciting, but nevertheless, I felt like it was underwhelming performances from the stars, and the X factors showed up in Richie Saunders and Melvin Council Jr., who played exceptional games and raised their draft stocks. I don't think AJ and Darren really hurt their stocks, but they definitely, I think, let down the viewers who expected a whole nother game. But tell me what your thoughts about this KU BYU game. And until next time, I'll see you next time.